Now that we have our first phase created, we can populate it with the tasks that will be performed during this phase. Looking at the CI phase, it's configured to automatically run when a new build is triggered in Jenkins. So for this phase, what we want to do is deploy the two different applications to the CI environment after each build notification arrives from Jenkins. Then we want to communicate out to the CI team that the applications were deployed, and then we're going to run some tests on the two applications after they're deployed. To keep this demonstration simple, as we create the tasks, we'll introduce several key features in CDD, such as the use of tokens, then explore those features in more detail in later instruction once we understand the core concepts. So to create our first task, we'll click Create a Task. And our first task is going to be to deploy the Web Backend application to the CI environment. So we'll name the task Deploy Web Backend. Next, we need to associate the task with an application. So from the Applications dropdown, we'll select Web Backend version Q4 1.5. So our version number for this application is Q4 1.5, and that's going to stay the same throughout the release. But in the next field, Builds for Applications, we'll define what the Jenkins build numbers will be for this application. And unlike the application version number, the build number will change and be updated with each new build notification that's received from Jenkins. In this field, we could enter a hard-coded number, say build 6, but if we do this, the release will only interact with builds that come through as build 6. What we want to do is make sure we're always deploying the most recent builds from Jenkins. And to do this, we're going to use a token. And if you look in the Builds for Applications field, you can see that there's already a token populating this field called Web Backend Last Successful Change. This is a built-in token that's created when an application is defined in the release. And the way this token works is when a new build comes in, the Web Backend Last Successful Change token is assigned the number of the new build and the notification that's received from Jenkins. So by using this token, we're ensuring that the most recent build is always associated with this task. And we'll use this token throughout the release to make sure that we're always promoting and deploying a successful build in each phase of the release. And we'll look at how this works in more detail in later instruction. But for now, just note that CDD makes it easy to associate a successful build by adding the last successful change token by default. Next, we can add an optional description, so we'll put in deploys Web Backend to the CI environment. We'll leave the owners field blank for now, as we won't have any owners other than myself in this task. But similar to the owners field in the phase, the owners field in a task allows CDD users who might not be phase owners to execute and modify the task. So if this were a manual task, an owner could be assigned as the person who would come in and manually update the task as needed. The next field is the task type, and by default, it's set to manual. The task type field is where you choose the type of action that this task is going to perform. And this could be a deployment, an automated test execution, or a variety of other actions that are all listed in the task type dropdown. Because of the number of different task types that are available, we'll only be able to demonstrate a few here. In this example, we're going to start out with an automated deployment task that uses Ansible Tower for the deployment. So we'll scroll down, and as you can see, there are a wide variety of task types to choose from. Under Ansible Tower, we'll choose Run Job Template. Notice that an endpoint field has now shown up. So the task type that we choose determines whether additional fields need to be populated. We'll go ahead and click the drop-down for the endpoint field and choose the only option, Mobile Ansible 341. Then under the Input Parameters heading in the Template Name field, we'll enter Deploy All. We can also see that there's a deprecated build number field. This field was previously used to determine which build number to deploy, but since this field is deprecated, Ansible Tower will use the values in the Builds for Applications field, which is using the Web Backend Last Successful Change token. So whenever Ansible Tower deploys the application, it's always going to use the value that's assigned to the Web Backend Last Successful Change token. Under the Advanced header, there are options for what actions the task should take in the event of a failure during the deployment. The default option is to wait for a user to come in and manually perform steps, or if an on-failure phase exists, to run that phase. An on-failure phase is a phase that runs in the event of a failure, and it contains specific tasks to run when a failure occurs. And we're going to create an on failure phase later in this process. The next option here is to just automatically skip the task. And the third option is to always wait for user action, even if an on failure phase is defined. For this task, we're going to stick with the default setting. So at this point, we're done configuring the task and we can click Create. And now we can see that we have our first task in the CI phase, Deploy Web Backend, and we can see that this is a Run Job template task. Next, we're going to build out two additional tasks. The first task uses Slack to post a message to the CI team that the latest build of the web backend application has been deployed. The second task will run a suite of automated tests, and it will be using the adaptive testing feature in CDD. And rather than taking up the time to create these tasks, we'll pause the video for a moment to build these out. And now you can see we have two additional tasks, and we will talk in more detail in later instruction about how these tasks were configured. But for now, we'll just point out that we have a post message task and a run adaptive testing task. And at this point, we could repeat this process for the web front-end application, but instead we'll use the duplicate task feature to quickly recreate these tasks and then make minor edits to them so that they work for the web front-end application.